It's an auspicious day. I sat here watching the introduction of bills, and I don't. There wasn't coordination, but unless maybe it was by our central staff, which is much smarter than us in a lot of ways on these several layers of housing protection that are being provided with these bills. I really appreciate Councilmember Glass's work and Councilmember Katz on making sure that people can actually be housed. Right? That's a core function of what you need to do to take care of yourself and or your family. And then these very common sense and practical solutions that are that you put forward, Mr. President. I was sitting here thinking about that young man, and I want to thank the Renters Alliance and the city of Tacoma Park who kind of came around him and his family and raised money and to help. It's not going to be anywhere near what is needed in the loss of a child. I cannot imagine listening to screams in my background all day, just hoping someone didn't fall and get hit. I mean, just can't imagine. So I just want to thank you for the introduction of those bills. And I'd also like to be listed as a co-sponsor. I waited till my time of I am of Councilmember Glass's bill, but of your two bills as well, Mr. President.
Thank you.
This bill is in line. I alluded to it this morning. A recent American Community Survey found that over just about half of renters and 23% of homeowners in Montgomery County are housing burdened, meaning they pay more than 30% of their 30% or more of their income on housing. We know that about 33% of Montgomery County residents at total rent their homes. And even before the pandemic, the Office of Legislative Oversight did a racial equity profile for Montgomery County and identified that 54.5% of our Black residents are renters, 62% of Latino renters, and 44% of white renters, and 42% of Asian renters. High numbers, almost half or more of everybody were housing burdened, meaning it's expensive to live here. Obviously, the onset of COVID has made things considerably worse, with many people being laid off and facing loss of income. And in October of this year, across the state of Maryland alone, do you all hear that ringing? Okay, good. All right. So it's just me.
I'm concerned if you do.
I definitely hear it. In October of this year, across the state of Maryland, it was estimated close to 300,000 households were unable to pay their rent just in October. Our office has taken tons of calls and referred people to services. We heard earlier today from our Department of Health and Human Services that the $20 million we allocated is already accounted for. It's not distributed, but it's been allocated. And sadly, as we approach the winter months and face another spike in COVID-19 cases, the situation is only going to get worse. And once we finally do begin to see some relief and the vaccines start to take hold, which we're all hopeful for, the lack of affordable housing in Montgomery County will be even a greater issue. And renters in particular will be and are at significant risk. So this afternoon, as part of the More Housing for More People initiative I mentioned this morning, I'm introducing this bill 5220, Landlord-Tenant Relations, Protections Against Rent Gouging Near Transit. In short, it would establish protections against rent gouging for rental units within 1 mile of Metro Rail, MARC, and Purple Line transit stations, and within 1/2 mile of bus rapid transit stations. We heard earlier this week, last week rather, in the Fed committee, a report from our planning department and their consultants on the housing preservation study that identified proximity to transit as one of the top reasons that prices are going up for renters in transit corridors, and also suggesting that we look at a form of targeted rent stabilization or anti-rent gouging, which this bill is. This would provide exceptions that are important. It would limit the increase to the voluntary rent guidelines established each year by our Department of Housing and Community Affairs, and it will provide for exceptions of 5 years for new construction before new buildings are subject to these range of rents. And it would also allow for renovation. If renovations or upgrades are made, that's an exception as well, to be able to increase the rent outside the guidelines. Preserving affordable housing near transit allows people to stay in their communities and enjoy the benefits of transit-oriented development that housing brings. And this supports this by providing protection against rent gouging and reducing displacement and push out and gentrification that we've seen for renters who currently live near transit, corridors like the Purple Line and Long Branch, where I grew up, and around other metro stations and transit that is built or is being built. This is an important consideration for racial equity. We know that oftentimes communities of color live near transit, and we need to make sure that they can stay there. Bill 5220 also supports economic stability by providing greater accessibility to employment opportunities for our frontline workers and for the people who must rely on public transit to get to work. 5022 gives landlords the ability to raise rents, as I said, up to the voluntary rent guidelines each year. And information we've actually compiled from the planning department shows that most rents around the county have stayed within the voluntary rent guidelines over the last 20 years. And as such, this anti-rent gouging legislation would not cause any undue harm to landlords, especially with the exceptions. The housing preservation study, again, showed that this is a threat to nationally occurring affordable housing near transit, and that we need to take action on the supply side as I did this morning, and we are doing in other venues, and on the renter protection side. Data from the Urban Institute showed that between 2015 and 2013, that Montgomery County could lose nearly 12,000 affordable units with federal subsidies, 600 public housing units, and 22,000 naturally affordable units. So the combination of these two proposals, the missing middle proposal this morning and Bill 5220, provide a win-win situation for tenants, for landlords, and the environment. If we truly want to provide more housing for more people, we must continue to look for innovative ways to increase affordable housing while protecting our renters. We must do both and not either or. I'm proud that this legislation is supported by the Sierra Club and Casa de Maryland and the Action Committee for Transit and the Renters Alliance, and hopefully more to come to show that we need to have this conversation jointly. So thank you, Mr. President, and I hope my colleagues will support these bills.